If you like our stories, please like, comment, and subscribe. The Art of Deception. Detective Naomi Rey halted at the entrance to Luca Vermeulen's studio, feeling the weight of the scene before her. The studio had an almost haunted aura, filled with relics of a life built on art and meticulous control, a legacy both dazzling and grotesque. A faint chemical odor clung to the air, a mixture of paint, solvents, and something metallic, a scent that whispered secrets to those daring enough to listen. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast an eerie glow, illuminating fragments of Luca's world. Scattered palettes, worn paintbrushes, sketches pinned haphazardly on the walls, each artifact suspended in a stillness that felt alive. As Naomi's eyes scanned the space, she caught sight of Luca's latest creation, his final creation, the Fall of Saints. The mural stretched across an entire wall, a sprawling canvas of terror and beauty, both incomplete and perfect. Naomi felt an uneasy pull toward it, as though the faces within it were pleading for her to understand them. Luca's signature technique, a breathtaking manipulation of light and shadow, rendered each figure disturbingly lifelike. The faces seemed to pulsate with unspoken emotion, each a silent scream frozen in time. In the center was the face of Simon Gauthier, Luca's apprentice. Naomi recognized Simon immediately, even through the artistic embellishments. The young man's wide eyes and open mouth were painted with such precision that she could almost hear his silent scream. Around Simon's neck was his signature red scarf, yet in Luca's hands, it had transformed into something sinister, curling tightly like a noose ready to choke the life from him. Beside him was Mara Lang, Luca's ex-wife and former muse. Mara's face, known to the world through countless portraits, was twisted in a mixture of rage and sorrow. Luca had captured her essence with such intensity that Naomi felt a pang of empathy for the woman she'd never met. Luca had been Mara's partner, her lover, her obsession, and ultimately her undoing. But here, in his final work, he had reduced her to a mere fragment of his twisted vision, her beauty shadowed by despair. Toward the edge of the mural, nearly swallowed by darkness, was Oscar Finch, Luca's longtime art dealer and confidant. In life, Oscar was known for his charm, his magnetic presence, the way he could effortlessly draw people into Luca's world. Yet here, Luca had painted him as a man recoiling from some unseen horror, his expression a mixture of fear and disgust, his usually vibrant face blending into the shadows as though he were already fading from existence. Naomi couldn't help but shiver. This mural wasn't just art. It was a confession, a twisted love letter, a chilling premonition all in one. Luca had poured his soul into this final piece, and it seemed to watch her, whispering the secrets he had taken to his grave. "Detective Rey?" Officer Grant's voice broke the heavy silence. She turned to see him standing a few feet away, a grim look on his face. "The forensics team finished up last night," he said, handing her a folder of reports. "They're ruling it an accident, a fall from the scaffolding while he was working. No signs of foul play." Naomi nodded, though her gaze remained fixed on the mural. "Did they find anything unusual?" Grant hesitated, his eyes drifting to the mural before he answered. "Nothing definitive, but something doesn't sit right. Luca was a perfectionist, known for his control. Falling like that, it seems strange." Naomi's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene once more. Luca had been meticulous, obsessively controlling in every aspect of his work and life. A man like that wouldn't make a careless mistake, especially not on his magnum opus. Her eyes caught a small detail in the upper corner of the mural, a faint hourglass symbol, nearly obscured by swirling colors, its sands almost completely drained. An hourglass, the universal symbol of time slipping away. This wasn't just a work of art, it was a message. Naomi felt it in her bones. "Grant, I need every file we can get on Simon, Mara, and Oscar. Their history with Luca, any conflicts, any unresolved issues. And check for any unusual incidents or unexplained deaths connected to Luca. This mural is speaking to us. We just need to listen." Grant's expression shifted, but he nodded. I'll gather everything we have." As he left, Naomi returned to studying the mural, every face and brushstroke a silent plea for understanding. If her instincts were correct, Luca's death was no accident. This mural was the heart of a labyrinth, one that held dark secrets waiting to be unraveled. Back at her desk, Naomi sifted through piles of files, each one a fragment of Luca's world. The more she uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Luca's life was a web of connections, each thread tied to someone he had drawn close, only to sever when they no longer suited him. Each person had been pulled into his orbit, only to be left scarred, discarded, or, in some cases, erased. Her investigation led her first to the case of Ella Torres, a young artist who had idolized Luca early in her career. He had taken her under his wing, mentoring her, sharing his philosophies and techniques. She saw him as her hero, a guiding star in the often ruthless art world. But their relationship had soured after a public altercation. Witnesses described it as heated, with Luca's voice rising to a level that was, even for him, terrifyingly intense. Within a week, Ella had vanished. Her body was discovered days later in a nearby lake, her death ruled as accidental drowning. Yet her family insisted there was more to the story, that Ella had been deeply disturbed in the days before her disappearance. Naomi noted the unresolved tension in the case notes, an echo of doubt that had lingered ever since. Next was Julian Klein, a sculptor whose star had once shone as brightly as Luca's. The two artists had been contemporaries, their careers intertwined in mutual admiration and rivalry. Julian had publicly criticized Luca's work, dismissing it as empty, pretentious, devoid of real emotion. The words had cut deeply, and Luca had never forgiven him. Following Julian's critique, his reputation began to crumble, whispers of scandal and disgrace haunting him until his final days. Less than a year after his public denouncement of Luca, Julian fell from the balcony of his studio. His death ruled a suicide. But those who knew Julian described him as thoughtful, meticulous, not the type to act on impulse. The case notes hinted at an unresolved tension, a question mark that had haunted the investigators who'd closed the case. Then there was Anton Green, a prominent gallery owner and once Luca's closest confidant. Anton's gallery had showcased Luca's most famous works, and the two had been inseparable for years. But something had soured between them in the months leading up to Anton's death. He had distanced himself, refusing to host Luca's latest exhibits, turning down commissions he once would have accepted without a second thought. Anton was found dead of an opioid overdose, a surprise to those who knew him as strict about his health and lifestyle. The death was ruled accidental, and the case was closed without further investigation. Naomi frowned as she took in the details of each file. Ella, Julian, Anton, all had been close to Luca, each discarded in the wake of a bitter conflict or estrangement. Their lives had ended tragically, suspiciously, and without resolution. The mural seemed to speak of them too, faces echoing fear, despair, and betrayal. It was as though Luca's hand had guided each tragedy, erasing those he no longer wanted in his world. But what of those still in his orbit? Naomi knew she needed to talk to Simon, Mara, and Oscar. She arranged interviews, hoping to find answers where there had only been questions. Naomi sat in the sterile confines of the precinct's interview room, waiting as Simon Gauthier entered. He looked smaller than she remembered, his usually sharp demeanor dulled, his posture hunched with exhaustion. As he took a seat across from her, Naomi could see the tension in his eyes, a mixture of fear and anger. "Thank you for coming, Simon," she began, her voice calm and measured. "I want you to feel comfortable here. This isn't an interrogation, it's a conversation. I need you to be honest with me so I can understand what happened." Simon glanced down, his hands fidgeting. "I don't know what you want me to say," he murmured. "Luca and we had disagreements, sure, but I would never..." His voice trailed off, his gaze fixed on the floor. Naomi watched him carefully. "Simon, I know about the pressure Luca put on you. I know how demanding he was, how he pushed you. But sometimes, admiration can turn into something darker. Did Luca ever make you feel threatened? Simon's shoulders slumped, and for a moment Naomi saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, anger, and something else. An emotion he seemed almost too ashamed to acknowledge. He had this way of looking at people, like he could see every flaw, every imperfection. He made you feel small, like you were nothing if you didn't live up to his expectations. I thought he was pushing me to be better, but after a while, I realized he wasn't helping me. He was controlling me. Naomi let Simon's words settle, each one revealing a layer of his relationship with Luca. Did you ever feel that he might hurt you? Simon hesitated, his hands clenching into fists. His voice dropped to a whisper. Yes. There were times when I thought he would find a way to destroy me. It was like living in a nightmare, every day wondering if it would be my last. Naomi arranged to meet with Mara Lang, Luca's former muse and ex-wife. Mara entered the interview room with a guarded expression, her gaze steady as she took a seat across from Naomi. Unlike Simon, whose fear was barely contained, Mara's face was unreadable, a mask of controlled composure. But Naomi could see the strain beneath it, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes hinting at a tension that had been simmering for years. "Thank you for coming, Mara," Naomi said, keeping her voice respectful. "I know discussing Luca may bring up difficult memories, but your insights could help me understand what truly happened." Mara's lips curved into a humorless smile. "Detective, there's no need to tiptoe around this. I've been dealing with the consequences of knowing Luca Vermeulen for a long time. This is just the final chapter." Naomi nodded, leaning forward. "You were once very close to Luca. His muse, his inspiration, perhaps even his obsession. But I also know that he took more from you than he ever gave." Mara's eyes flashed with anger, a spark of raw emotion quickly extinguished. "Obsession doesn't begin to describe it. Luca was consumed by his own vision, and he saw me as an extension of that. To him, I was more than a muse. I was a possession, a part of his pure world. Every part of me had to fit his ideal, or I was nothing." Naomi's gaze was steady. "Did you ever feel like your life was in danger? That he might remove you if you failed to meet his standards?" Mara hesitated, the mask slipping for a brief moment. "There were moments when I feared for my life, Detective. He was never violent, not in a physical sense. But he had a way of breaking you down, of making you feel like you were worthless if you didn't fit into his perfect world. I realized too late that Luca didn't see people as individuals. He saw us as pieces of his masterpiece, tools he could manipulate and discard." Naomi absorbed Mara's words, each one a testament to the toxic power Luca had wielded over those closest to him. "Mara, what finally made you leave him?" Mara's expression darkened, her gaze distant as though she were reliving painful memories. "I finally saw him for what he was. A man who didn't love, who didn't care. He was a black hole, pulling everyone into his orbit until there was nothing left of them. I couldn't bear to be consumed by him any longer." There was a bitter edge to Mara's voice, a lingering sense of betrayal that went beyond mere disappointment. Naomi sensed that this was a woman who had lost herself in Luca's world, only to claw her way out, leaving fragments of her soul behind. "Thank you, Mara," Naomi said softly. "I know this wasn't easy, but you've given me invaluable insight into Luca's psyche." Mara nodded, her face unreadable once more. "I just hope it helps you understand what he truly was. People called him a genius, but he was dangerous. He saw the world as a canvas, and we were just brushstrokes, replaceable and disposable." Oscar Finch arrived at the precinct later that day. Known for his carefully cultivated public image, Oscar was immaculately dressed, exuding the same polish and charm that had made him a staple in the art world. But Naomi could see the weariness in his eyes, a subtle tension in his posture that betrayed the strain of maintaining his facade. "Thank you for coming, Oscar," Naomi said as he settled into the chair across from her. "I appreciate your willingness to discuss Luca." Oscar crossed his legs, his hands folded neatly over his knee. His gaze was sharp, calculating, the eyes of a man accustomed to weighing every word. "Of course, Detective. I understand you have questions. I'll do my best to answer." Naomi wasted no time, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Simon and Mara both shared difficult truths about Luca, how he viewed those closest to him as impurities in his life, people who didn't meet his impossible standards. They saw the fall of saints as a declaration, a message that he intended to remove them. For the first time, Oscar's carefully constructed mask slipped. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his gaze shifting to the wall behind her before meeting her eyes again. There was a flicker of something raw in his expression, something he was struggling to keep contained. Luca was a genius detective, Oscar began, his voice still measured but carrying a hint of darkness. But he was also troubled. That obsession with purity? It wasn't just a philosophy, it was a consuming force. He saw the world as an extension of his art, and he saw people as either worthy or unworthy of being part of it. Naomi leaned forward, sensing that Oscar was finally ready to reveal the truths he had kept hidden. "Did he ever discuss this with you directly?" Oscar exhaled slowly, his composure wavering. "Not in so many words." Luca was subtle. He preferred implication, suggestion. He'd look at you a certain way, say things that left you wondering if you'd failed him. Over time, I began to see how he pushed people out of his life, almost as if he were purging them. Naomi's eyes narrowed as she considered his words. Simon and Mara both mentioned that they felt Luca had a pattern, one that involved removing anyone who disappointed him. Ella, Julian, Anton, they all crossed him and they all ended up dead. Did you notice this pattern too? Oscar's expression darkened, his gaze dropping for the first time. Yes, I noticed. But what could I do? Luca was untouchable. He was the art world's golden boy, and questioning him would have meant the end of my career. He had a way of controlling people, manipulating them into silence. By the time you realized what he was capable of, it was too late. Naomi felt a chill as she listened, each piece fitting into the puzzle she had been assembling. Luca's world was a fortress of control, a carefully constructed reality where only those who met his impossible standards were permitted to remain. And when someone failed him, he found a way to eliminate them. So when you saw the mural, Naomi continued, her voice gentle but insistent, when you saw yourself painted alongside Simon and Mara with those expressions, those symbols, you felt like you were next? Oscar's composed exterior cracked, and for a brief moment his true fear shone through. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw that mural and I knew. He had painted us as his fallen saints, his failures, his impurities. It was a warning, detective. A message that we didn't belong in his world anymore. Naomi let the silence hang, allowing Oscar's words to settle. The man before her wasn't the confident, polished dealer she'd expected. He was someone who had been pushed to the edge, forced to confront a reality that shattered his carefully maintained facade. You, Simon, and Mara acted to survive, Naomi said softly, her voice free of judgment. You did what you had to do. Oscar nodded, his face haunted. We didn't have a choice. Luca was a threat we couldn't escape. We knew he would never stop, that he would go to any length to purify his world, and we weren't willing to let him do that to us. Naomi felt a pang of empathy for the man sitting before her. In Luca's world, survival had become a matter of betrayal or destruction, forcing each of them into an impossible choice. As Naomi pored over her notes later that evening, she felt the weight of each revelation settle over her. Luca Vermeulen had been a man of immense talent, but his genius had come at an unimaginable cost. He had surrounded himself with people he could control, bending their lives to fit his vision, only to discard them when they no longer served his purpose. The Fall of Saints wasn't just a masterpiece. It was Luca's final act of control, a calculated declaration of his worldview, a world where only those who met his impossible standards were permitted to remain. Each interview, each file she reviewed, revealed a new layer of Luca's manipulation. He had been both mentor and tyrant, a figure who commanded loyalty while giving none in return. And those who dared to defy him had found themselves trapped in a nightmare, their lives consumed by his relentless pursuit of artistic purity. As Naomi stared at the photographs of the mural, each face took on a new significance. Simon, Mara, and Oscar had not been paranoid or overly dramatic. They had been victims, trapped in a web of controls so intricate that escape had seemed impossible. Luca had pushed them to the edge, forcing them to choose between submission and destruction. In the quiet of her office, Naomi allowed herself a moment of reflection. She felt a profound sadness for those who had been caught in Luca's shadow, each one drawn in by his brilliance, only to be consumed by the darkness that lay beneath. The Fall of Saints would stand as both Luca's greatest work and his greatest failure, a testament to the devastating power of unchecked genius. Naomi closed her case notes, feeling the heavy weight of the investigation lingering like a shadow. Luca Vermeulen's legacy was not just his art, but the fear he had instilled in those closest to him. His genius had cast a long, dark shadow, transforming his studio into a prison, a place where he wielded power over his loved ones, with an iron grip disguised as mentorship. Stepping out into the night, Naomi knew that this case would stay with her. It was a stark reminder of the fine line between brilliance and madness, of the people who had suffered for the sake of an artist's twisted vision. As she walked away from the precinct, Naomi felt a sense of closure, tempered by the knowledge that for Simon, Mara, and Oscar, there would be no easy escape from the trauma Luca had inflicted. His shadow would haunt them, a reminder of the price they had paid for living in a world created by a man who demanded everything, yet gave nothing in return.